Welcome to the February 28th regular Planning Commission meeting. For the record, Commissioner Wassinger is absent. Freeman, Mann, Hovey, and Pierce are in attendance. Open the public hearing, and first item on the agenda is approve the minutes of the January 24th regular business meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes from the last Planning Commission meeting.
I second.
We have a first and a second to approve the January 24th regular business meeting minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, unanimous approved. Next item on the agenda is the public comment period. Planning Commission will accept public comments for items not otherwise on the agenda for the first 15 minutes of the Planning Commission meeting. Seeing nobody in attendance at this time, I'll close that item. We'll go to item 4A. This is the 2016 Planning Commission Annual Report to City Council.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Members of the Planning Commission, Steve Powers, Director of Development Services. It's my pleasure to conclude this item with you. As you know, we introduced the Planning Commission's annual report to the City Council for the year 2016 at your January meeting, giving you an opportunity to see what we had put together for you, and then gave you the month to think about whether there are any changes that you might like to make or any recommendations you might like to make to the council. As a reminder, what it includes is a list of accomplishments. In summary form, it includes what we think is your proposed work program for 2017. There is a section for, if you choose, for recommendations to the City Council. And then section 4 includes more of the details associated with the actions that you took over the course of last year. So pretty straightforward, same format that we've used in previous years. I'd be happy to help you with any questions. Certainly, if you have any recommendations you'd like for us to pass along to the council, we'd obviously be putting those in before it goes to City Council. If at the end of this evening's item, we do ask that you make a recommendation to send it forward to the council. Thank you.
I'll open up a discussion for this item. I was very pleased myself with the document. We've had a busy year, and a wide range of items and types of issues that we've had to address this year. And so it was a learning curve as far as I was concerned. But
That's the same here. I thought it was very well put together and stuff, and it does remind you of all the accomplishments that we've accomplished and us working together and stuff like that. So I think it was a very successful year.
I think staff would agree. It is an interesting reminder every time I look through one. I'm like, oh, wow, we did that. Oh, yeah. Oh, there was that item too. And so there, year after year, the Planning Commission does a substantial body of work on behalf of the city.
well, my main comment is that, fortunately now you have the staff to work through these issues, and that wasn't always the case. And so I'm pleased that we were able to get you some assistance to help the city grow like they need to grow, because you were kind of shorthanded there for first couple of years that I was here, and it was a challenge, especially with the comp plan, all of that. And some of the projects we're getting into now are different, and that's kind of a lot of fun.
Good.
So I look forward to the challenges of next year or this coming year. So.
Are there any recommendations that you'd like to put forward in section on page 8, which is part of section 3, or are you comfortable just not having anything in there?
I didn't have any recommendations. I think it's a very well drafted.
Okay. Just want to be sure that we ask the question. That's all.
Yes, I understand.
Well, then if there's no recommendations, go ahead and make the motion.
Okay.
Okay, I make the motion that we accept the planning commission's, or that the planning commission's annual report to the city council is forwarded for 2016.
I second the motion.
We have a first and a second to accept and forward this to the city council. Planning Commission general recommendations to the city council at this time. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none? Good job, Steve.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is item number B, 4B, code amendment to consider rezoning request. This is a public meeting.
Good evening, CACMAC Senior Planner. Here to present the text amendments we're considering for rezoning. I provided a brief presentation at the last meeting. I'll do the same just to refresh your memory, and then to talk about a little bit about what we're doing to bring a draft text amendment forward to you at your next meeting. So the background for why we're considering this text amendment actually starts with the comprehensive plan. So when we updated the 2016 comprehensive plan, the previous land use map was a 1-to-1 ratio. Basically, every land use category had an implementing zoning category. And so therefore, if you wanted to rezone some property, you had to first go change the land use designation and then do the rezoning, which ended up being sometimes a year-long process. And in some case, from the time that a property owner thinks about rezoning, it could be 2 years if they miss the window. So in February, if you thought, oh, I'd like to rezone my property, and you come to the city and we go, well, come back in October because that's when the applications are due, so you've lost that much time. And then you come back, and then it's still a year process before any action could be taken. So it was a really long time to consider changes, and so that kind of actually sometimes discourages redevelopment and other development opportunities. So we were always looking for ways to amend that, and the 2016 update was a great time to talk about that. We did that. So we have now a generalized land use map that each land use category is implemented by 2 to 3 zoning categories. So changing between one of those zoning categories is a rezoning process that could be done faster through our zoning code. The way it looks kind of graphically, this is the 2016, the 1-to-1 ratio. For example, the low density residential was implemented by the R1 single family and community commercial by C3. In the 2016 update, we have low-intensity residential that's implemented by R1, R2, and R3, and therefore changing zoning from R1 to R3 is just a it'll be a different process, shorter process, and does not require a comprehensive plan amendment, so it could be done faster. So in order to implement this change, we have to do some text amendments. Our current language was not written with this in mind. It was written, most of the language is pre-GMA even. That's how long that section has been amended. So it's really old language and uses very old techniques to do that. And we definitely think that there's a chance for improvement and more opportunities there. So what's the current language say? So the language was designed for map amendments to align with the comprehensive plan designation. And what they did at that time, this is pre-GMA, is because we had this 1-to-1 ratio, and then you made changes, and anytime you wanted to rezone a particular piece of property, the current language requires development plans to be submitted along with that. So rezoning became a bigger task. It wasn't just I want my property to be R2 instead of R1, and I'll figure out how to put 2 houses, I've got enough land. No, it needed to have the plans and all of that come along with the rezoning. So when plans and so on come along with your rezoning application, usually usually you have conditions and restrictions because everybody's looking at the plans and going, okay, this is not going to work, and so you need to do this. And so soon you start to enter into a pretty laborious process in reviewing development along with the rezoning request. And so that sometimes leads to contract zoning, which is, you enter into a contract because they want to prevent some uses from going in. So recently the city did a contract zoning amendment for the Kmart property. The Kmart property was built with the contract zoning. It didn't come through Planning Commission because it was just a change to the contract that was approved. It went through City Council. And it was a pretty laborious process in order to go through and make a change because the ordinance that approved the rezoning had to be changed as well because all of it was done in one action. So the rezoning and the contract, everything is kind of combined. And it's great when you approve that for a development, a new development, and that moves forward. But 5 years, 10 years down the road, when you want to do redevelopment or make changes so the community has changed, now you got to go back and look at numerous documents and see which all documents do you need to amend in order to make a change. So it just becomes laborious, and we thought there's an easier way to do it. Some of the drawbacks of the older process is, again, you had to invest a lot in the process because you had to develop plans. Because you develop plans, you have to probably go through a SEPA review even before you got the rezoning. And then you have restrictions that run with the land, which sometimes are great when at the time of development, but 10, 15 years down the road, things may change, and those restrictions may not make sense anymore. But because you approved it with the land, it just runs forever. And those are all kind of limitations on properties. And again, that makes it all difficult to redevelop and repurpose. So what are some of the things that we could do to make it better? Well, when staff looked at it, we wanted to simplify the process. We didn't want it to be so many multiple kind of reviews all intertwined and approved and make redevelopment more difficult. So what are the things that we can eliminate based on how we've adopted the comprehensive plan? What's the intent of a particular land use category? For example, the reason why we combine these land uses, R1, R2, and R3, is because we think that most of these uses here are similar, and they can coexist to a certain extent adjacent to each other. Yeah, they are different uses, different intensity, but based on a location, if an R1 property is right on an arterial street, on a street corner, and could benefit from an R2 and an R3 zoning just because it has access to public transit, better infrastructure, then why not? Why put restrictions on uses and try to be onerous about it? So we combined them because with the understanding that there is an intent that we want to achieve, some mixed development, mixed uses we want to achieve, and make the community as diverse as possible. So we want to try and make that process a little easier to implement. So going down just the list of things that we have in our current ordinance, what are some of the things that we can eliminate? So require development plans concurrent with rezoning. This is a requirement. We don't think it's necessary anymore with the new type. I mean, we have this, most of the current language is pre-GMA, and so now we have a lot of development regulations that regulate development to a good extent. We have the SEPA checklist. We have a lot of regulatory processes in place to deal with development that we don't need to do it at the rezoning stage. So we don't need that. Quasi-judicial hearing before the hearing examiner, this is what is in the current process, and this is, our legal counsel says that this is the right process to consider rezoning. So we think we can leave that process in there. Actually, I take it back. Yes, never mind. Requiring site plans. Don't need that either because we don't need development plans to go along with rezoning. We don't need to look at development plans. Provisions for conditions and restrictions. We don't need to really look at rezoning and start assigning conditions to it. Again, going back to the old way of doing things. If we started assigning conditions and restrictions to the rezoning, then that runs with the land forever. And so that places restriction on future redevelopment. So we don't need to be doing that. Require the ordinance to list all conditions and restrictions. This is again a requirement of the old one. So, you know, we don't need to be doing this and tying up all these conditions and restrictions with the rezoning. If you attach conditions to rezoning, then you have to write language in there to say how you can modify them. And then you got to develop a process for that. So it becomes lengthier. Provisions for contract rezoning increase or restrict density, decrease uses, etc. I think this is again going against what we are trying to do with the land use policy change that we did in 2016. So contract zoning was something like, okay, you know, in the old days, when you came to the city and said, I'd like to rezone my property from industrial to commercial. And both the city and the developer would sit and say, okay, in order to make that zoning work, these are the things we have to do. And so it was a negotiated rezoning, and we don't need to do that anymore, again, because we do have regulatory ways of doing the development and mitigating for all the impacts. So we do have regulations, and we can rely on those to take care of those. So we eliminate all the drawbacks, basically, by keeping it simple. So what do we want to add? Development agreement. So this is a new term, development agreement. So the only condition that you would place on a rezoning, if you did have any concerns, and this is a maybe, this is a choice that the planning commission, the hearing examiner or the city council can make, is do we really see any impacts with the rezoning? If we do see any impacts with the rezoning, the only condition you place on the rezoning is you have to enter into a development agreement. And the development agreement will deal with the development issues. It won't restrict uses. It won't say that you got to, reduce density, or you can't, it's not going to alter your general zoning regulations. It's just going to talk about the development, maybe placement of building, maybe access points, maybe buffers, where they're placed. Simple things like that can be addressed through the development agreement, but you're not tying all those conditions to the actual rezoning. So that's kind of how we think that the language will work better. So what we'll do is we'll bring a draft code amendment to the Planning Commission at the next meeting. To review a text amendment, this is generally the process. It goes through Planning Commission and City Council. All text amendments need to have a SEPA review. We'll start that process, and that'll be ongoing. We'll have to notify the Department of Commerce when we're doing development regulation changes. And of course, a hearing before Planning Commission and City Council. Hearings will be noticed in the newspaper. We're not asking you to do take any actions, but we just wanted to share with you the strategy of how to simplify this. So this is kind of the direction we're going with that. And from what I've provided you, do you have any questions or any concerns on the direction we're going with this? Or are we simplifying it too much, or do we want to still have conditions, restrictions? Those are the things that I want to hear from the Planning Commission on whether we're going in the right direction or not. So I'll bring back this. Go ahead, Steve.
CAC, you might want to explain to them what the Department of Commerce notification is and why we do that, the time that's associated with that.
So any development regulations that we do, the Department of Commerce requires us to notify them so that they can notify other agencies. And they have two different methodologies of trying to do that. They have kind of an expedited process where you send them the code language and you ask them for the expedited process, which is what we'll ask for this one. It's a simple text amendment, simple code amendment. And they take 10 days to respond to us to say if they have any concerns, whether the regulations meet state requirements, so on and so forth. We think it does. They also have a 60-day period for example, like the comprehensive plan amendment. We still have to notify Department of Commerce that we're doing we're adopting a capital improvements plan. We're changing our land use. And they take 60 days to review that, and then send the changes to all the other state agencies, DOE, Department of Wildlife, Transportation, all of that, and get feedback, and then send us any concerns that they think from a state standpoint that we need to coordinate. So that is part of the notification process that we need to provide for them. So they kind of keep track of that, and at least just keep a, I wouldn't say track, just keep an eye out to see if there's any inconsistencies with any of the state laws and rules that they have.
Thank you.
So, are we waiting on this new code change for anybody to take advantage of the streamlining process that you did?
Yes,
So
we
if
do
somebody
have.
comes to you today and says, I want to change from R1 to R3, you're going to say, can't do anything until city council approves a new code.
Yes, we are asking them to hold on for just a little while we iron out the process for this. Yes, and we do have at least 2 people that are keeping an eye on it. They don't seem to be in a hurry. They just want to know when it'll be available. They're thinking about it.
Thank you.
Is this going to streamline the system for the department itself more so? It looks like a lot has been removed. And that's one of the concerns that's always been out there, is just any kind of a development agreement or any kind of development period. It's a long process, and it sounds like this is removing a lot of that paper shuffling and time constraints that's been out there in the past.
Absolutely, it'll shrink the time. The process is similar in terms of the steps that's involved. You know, hearing, notification. You know, and all of that is about the same time. But there's a lot of work that's done even before we get to the hearing and before we notice in the paper. And that sometimes is the longest time because it's a lot of back and forth between the applicant and the city. And especially if you go into agreements and conditions and restrictions, you're going over a lot of that before the commission and the council gets to see a lot of that information. So that section of time will be greatly reduced, and that is a big time saver.
Good.
Yeah.
That's pleasing to hear. Any other questions?
All right, so we'll come back at the next meeting with some draft language, and it's from a 2-page, we've made it into a 1-page, so it'll be easy.
Streamlined again.
Yes.
Our next regular business meeting will be on March 28th, 2017. If there's no questions, I adjourn the meeting.
All right, thank you.